Hello, history friends, and welcome to this live stream review of Southeast Asia in the global Middle Ages. And that's a phrase I'll be explaining some as I go through here, this idea of a global Middle Age. Introduce myself a little bit before we jump in. I'm Eric Beckman. I'm the lead AP World teacher here at Fiveable. So I do a lot of stream scheduling and I review slides and work on topics with people. I'm doing this stream because I think it's very important. And I read a lot about Southeast Asia over the summer, and so I wanted to try some things out. You can also follow me in terms of presentations and blogging at Twitter or along my website there. Okay. I'd like to thank Evan and Varun for help with the slides, and Ms. Harry and my student Sutita for content that they shared with me. They'll be part of this stream here today. All right, so if we take a look here at the, take a look at these pictures here. One of the things we want to do in AP World History is work on how can we support claims with, evidence. So what do you see here, and what conclusions could we draw about the civilization that produced these buildings? Okay, so sure, I think we can see here that there must have been a powerful government that was able to channel resources. That's an excellent point, to channel resources to build a civilization like this. This is actually the largest religious monument in the world. It's really large. And so that's one of the reasons I include this aerial shot, so you can see the big picture of it here and see what's happening. I also have on good authority that it's an excellent place to visit, and that it's in person even more awesome than it appears in pictures. So this is Angkor Wat, which is perhaps the most famous architectural remnant in Southeast Asia, and one of the probably most impressive monumental pieces of architecture from this entire period. So we'll talk about that. Okay. So here's what we'll talk about in this stream. We'll kind of pause for questions. So I first want to talk about what is Southeast Asia. So Southeast Asia is one of the regions defined by the College Board for World History. And what do we mean by that? And it kind of means physically, where is it? And also what kinds of factors are, what kinds of factors defined how it functioned? Like, how is it different than South Asia and East Asia, for one thing, and Oceania, which it borders, but also, how is it similar to other places around the world? And the two big things, like if you were a student taking notes on this for a class, or, doing this to go along with or help you with your reading, things that you might write down would be the trade and agriculture. And that's going to be a theme in that it's indigenous, like traditions that are native to the area, like the agricultural techniques, along with things that are coming in and out of the area from other regions. So one of those things coming in and out of the region is religion. So religion is often a big topic for Southeast Asia and the source of some of these fantastic visuals. Okay. And then we'll also look at states. These things go along with topic 1.3, the South and Southeast Asian developments in the unit that the College Board calls the Global Tapestry. So if you are working on that in your class, if your teacher's using those unit titles, this would be how those fit in. But I'll also be talking a lot about exchange, things that are from the second unit in the course. So these would be two empires that we can use as examples of these themes. And there's a few others, and you should know that all the different examples are just possibilities, that no student will have to know all of these examples in order to succeed in the, on the AP test. So you wouldn't have a question that would assume that you would know what the Majapahit Empire is. What you might have instead is a question where the stimulus describes the Majapahit Empire, and you need to recognize the themes or patterns from Southeast Asia in this time period that it fits. Or alternately, you might have a long essay question or a short answer question that asks you to identify an example of something. And then something like, say, Majapahit would be one of the possible examples, but you could also perhaps cite another one. You might be able to, cite the Khmer Empire or the Sukhothai, or, you'll have options. So I'll use these two as examples because I think they're important, but you should know that if you're in a class and your teacher used other examples and you've never talked about the Majapahit Empire, you're going to be just fine. It's just a way to work through those big ideas. All right, and we'll take a look at how it fits into the world. So the first question then is, what do we mean by Southeast Asia? So can anyone name a Southeast Asian country or place? Just to kind of think, like, where are we talking about? Give you a moment. Southeast Asia is very important in world history, and it's home today to some of the biggest countries in the world. Like the fourth largest country in the world is, yep, that's right, is Indonesia. So Indonesia is the world's fourth largest country, and it is in Southeast Asia. So it's also Southeast Asia's largest country. We have that. Yes, Vietnam, thank you, Cam Lin, is an example of a Southeast Asian country. Okay. So let's take a peek here. So this you can put into the poll or even just in the chat. So which of these islands is part of Southeast Asia? Just go ahead and guess. You can just put it in the chat. We don't need to use the poll. Let's see. You can just take a peek. All right. It is Sumatra, which is right next to Java. But it's larger than Java, but has fewer people. Java has a lot of people. I shared this picture with my class, and some of you might have seen it in your class with your teachers. But it's one of the reasons to talk about Southeast Asia is that Asia is where the people live, like in the world. So if you've seen this, people seen this visual before? Out there in the world? It's from, I think it was shared on Reddit initially. It's been published all over the place. So you have that. So you can see China and India, and then Indonesia is the islands in the bottom part of the map. When people talk about Southeast Asia, they'll often divide it into two parts. So there's the mainland part, which I've circled there on the map, so you can see. And it includes those two empires, the Khmer Empire, which is the culture that today is the basis of Cambodian culture, and the Sukhothai culture, which is today Thailand. Although in both cases, their borders were bigger than what those countries are today. And there's also island Southeast Asia, which would be the rest of the green on islands. And that's, I don't know how many islands, it's at least 15,000 islands that make up island Southeast Asia. So Srivijaya was an empire based in Sumatra, which is the big island just south of the Mainland Peninsula. And then Majapahit Empire was one based on Java. And so those are both maritime empires. See, they're islands, so controlling trade with places around Indonesia. Okay. This region then is in between South Asia, so there's influence from the Indian subcontinent, Indian religions, and also Indian Ocean trade, which is going to take products all across the entirety of the Eastern Hemisphere. And then East Asia, which is going to involve contact with China, both over land and over sea. So one way to think of Southeast Asia, again, is as this productive place all by itself that's in between the world's two largest areas and, for all of human history, very influential areas, India and China. So how is it able to be so, why did it become such an important area? Why do so many people live there? Well, the first part is that the agriculture there in a lot of places is very productive. So that produces a surplus. So that would be wet rice agriculture, meaning rice that's grown in rice paddies. And what this allowed Southeast Asian farmers to do, like Chinese farmers, would be to use their fields continuously because they were taking animal and human waste, manure, they called night soil from human beings, and actually, in some cases, urine, which has a lot of phosphorus, and recycling it back into the paddies. If you're learning about Europe in the Middle Ages, you might know that in Europe, they had a two-field system where half the land was fallow, meaning there wasn't anything growing on it while it recovered its nutrients. And then the next year, the other half would be fallow. And then in the Middle Ages, there was this big development so that in Europe, so that there were three fields. So only one of the three fields was fallow during that time. So 1/3 of the land was fallow. There's nothing being produced on it. Well, in wet rice agriculture, all of the land is being used all the time. So, or all the farming land, the paddy is being used. So that's significant. And it's part of why there's so many people there, because the agriculture supported a large number of people. The monsoon winds then would be the physical basis for all this trade in the region. And then trade goods, especially spices. So outside of the region, a lot of these areas were referred to as the Spice Islands, or known for a spice that they produce. And we'll talk about those. And then finally, we're looking at an area that's in between, like the two of the three biggest population centers in the world. You can think of it this way: in the Middle Ages, really up until the 1700s, about 1/3 of the people, or excuse me, 1/4 of the people in the world live in China, about 1/4 live in India, and about 1/4 live in Europe. And then the last quarter live everywhere else. So Southeast Asia is part of that everywhere else, but they're in between two out of those three. And because of the connections, Silk Roads plus Indian Ocean, Red Sea, Mediterranean Sea, there are Southeast Asian products making their way all the way to Europe. Okay. So I mentioned this. Here's a picture from Java and Indonesia today, looking at rice paddies. And so you have a couple things going on here. You see all this surface with rice plants in it, and the paddy system is going to make that rice grow on the same land over and over again. So it's going to, the same amount of land is going to produce more calories than it would in other systems around the world. Now, this is really labor intensive because people have to, they grow the rice seedlings and then they transplant them into this field, into the paddy. So they grow, they start out as seeds and they sprout, and then people have to take them and plant them in the field, and then people harvest. And so these are family units of labor traditionally. And so they can support large populations, but it also takes a lot of laborers. And this, contributes to a lot of the cultural characteristics in these traditional communities where family is important and organization is important in order to produce that. You see this rice agriculture, especially in parts of the mainland and then in Java. Some of the other island areas and then in parts of the mainland are real hilly and mountainous even. And so you see this less in those places, but this would be what's producing the surplus in order to generate the population that will do all these other interesting things. So that's local. And then the monsoon winds is a really important thing in world history and the kind of thing you might have already learned about. And if not, you will. And like I said, you can tune into Mr. Lassiter's stream on the Indian Ocean Exchange in a couple of weeks, and it'll also come up in other exchanges. The thing with the monsoon winds is it's a pattern of wind near the Indian subcontinent, or driven by the Indian subcontinent. And it has a lot to do with the heat from central India and the cold in the Himalayas, creating flows of air back and forth, these wind patterns. And the seasonal aspect of it is, for a few months of the year, the wind primarily blows in one direction. And then for another few months of the year, it primarily blows in another direction. So the question then is, what effect will that have on cultural patterns. Like, how will that affect economic interactions? Well, that's right. One of the things that it will mean is that it's easier to travel. You don't need as sophisticated of a boat to travel because the wind's blowing in one direction. So catching that wind will blow people where they need to go. Now, eventually the ships will get real sophisticated, but it meant that sailing there were some advantages to sailing. And so sailing technologies develop here in this area. So that's going to allow exchange. But the fact that people have to wait until they go back to where they came from is going to mean, because they have to wait till the wind changes, is going to mean that diasporic communities are going to be one result of this. And so that's a word you should know. That's diasporic word, comes up a lot in the AP World History. It comes up a lot like on the AP test. It's a word to know. And what diasporic means is a community that's dispersed or spread out from its home country. So you would have merchants from India, for example, living in places in the islands and mainland part of Southeast Asia. Or you'd have merchants going back and forth, and there'd be people living there who provided services to them while they stayed. So a merchant might come from India with a load of cotton cloth and then stop and trade that maybe for some spices. But before they take the spices back, they have to wait for the wind to change. And so then as a result, they want to worship, they want to have a home, they want to, so they need a place to stay. And so a community that is permanent in the other place away from India of Indians develops that's providing services for these merchants going back and forth. And in some cases, these would be men, for the most part, doing the traveling, and they would marry women from the local society. And so you would get, blending of families, but also blending of cultures and additional cultural imports into that area. And then, of course, they would take some Southeast Asian culture with them back to India, say, and you could do the same thing with Chinese merchants or Arabic merchants or Persian merchants, on and on. Okay. So trade goods then, the most valuable goods coming from Southeast Asia were often plant-based. And you can take a look at those and see if you can guess what those things are. We have 3 of them, and there's another super famous one that I don't have a picture of. So if you were in my class this week, I did bring in some nutmeg, which is the top left one. So that's correct. And then on the right there, that's black pepper. Well, it's not black yet, it's green pepper, but can be turned into black pepper for sale. And then the bottom left is camphor. And camphor comes from the resin or the sap inside this kind of eucalyptus tree or a laurel tree. And then that could be used as a medicine, also as a perfume. It was a highly valued, widely available trade good. And it came out of the forest. So that'd be something, these would be things that would be gathered by local people and then sold to merchants. And then there'd be probably a relay system where those things would move around. And these things were very valuable. Also cloves, which are the buds or dried flower buds from a tree that grows in Southeast Asia, and mace, which is a relative of nutmeg. It smells kind of similar to that. So these are really valuable things. So that's part of why this region gets all this traffic. And then we also have goods coming from outside the region that are being traded here, especially cloth and porcelain from China. So one of the links I have down in the resources, you can check out the resources there, is to something on the Tang dynasty, which is a little earlier, but Chinese dynasty shipwreck. So a lot of the research has been done on shipwrecks. There's a link to a podcast on a shipwreck that went through this area, from this area as well. So again, a couple weeks, Mr. Lassiter will be going through the Indian Ocean trade, which is one of the most important things in all of world history. That was the DBQ last year, and it will definitely, Indian Ocean Exchange will definitely be on the AP test in one form or another. Maybe it's a multiple choice question or short answer question. Unlikely to be the DBQ again, but it could be a possible piece of evidence in any of the other food response questions. What these dots here, or circles, ovals, what they show are places that were entrepots, which means that things were traded there. So again, there might be cloth coming in from India into one of these places being sold there, and then products from a different place being picked up. And they could be locally produced products like camphor, but they could also be things coming from China. So there might be cotton being exchanged for silk, as just one example in these places. So these are areas. And then over time, the Chinese ships get bigger. So that's a Chinese junk there, which is related to a Southeast Asian kind of ship with a name derived from that, the Zhong. And these ships with the stern post rudder and the reinforced, battened sails, individual compartments, you can learn about these in future streams. These ships then could carry a lot of cargo. So they're going back and forth from China from the Song period forward to kind of like after 1000, into across to 1200. And there's also shipping coming across the Indian Ocean the other way. All right. Oop. Is not the slide there that I want. Sorry, I repeated that slide by mistake. Here we are, though. So any questions, why don't you go ahead and park those in the chat or in the Ask a Question tab. So I'll take a peek here, what we have inside. So just tuning in, too. If you have any questions about Southeast Asia, you can put them there, or you can hit the poll, too. Great. Who's learned about Srivijaya? That's awesome. Or used it as an example. And if you're just coming in too, you could also, there's a second poll question there about, if you're a student or a teacher. Curious, interesting to me. All right, great. So let's take a look at these religious influences then that are coming from other areas. And these influences have created some of the real memorable, visually appealing places in Southeast Asia. So this is the largest Buddhist temple in the world. If you look at the people, you can see how huge it is. And you can see here that it is Buddhist. An interesting thing for Southeast Asia is that Buddhism came there first before Hinduism in general, even though Buddhism's a younger religion, because by the time these trade groups and diasporic communities, trade routes and diasporic communities were fully developing, Buddhism was already on the scene. Plus there were Buddhist missionaries, and Buddhism came into the region from two different places, kind of came in from two different angles coming in. And so there's going to be, throughout this time period, there's going to be continuity and change. So as Buddhism comes in, it's not completely distinct from Hinduism. For one thing, we have Buddhism coming in from a few different areas. So Theravada Buddhism, the more strict kind, if you will, coming in from southern India, Sri Lanka. But then there's also the bigger vehicle, as they say, the Mahayana Buddhism is coming into Southeast Asia from China. So you have both things happening, and it's both merchant and traveler diasporic communities, but then it's also missionaries in some case. And so as this comes in, it's going to syncretize not only with Hinduism, so that means combine. So you'll have religious sites that have like a Buddha and Buddhist cosmology, like a Buddhist view of the universe. And there might also be some Shaivism, like worship of Shiva as well, or there might be a king or prince who takes on Shiva or the Hindu god Vishnu as like their identity, but they're also practicing Buddhism or encouraging Buddhism. So you kind of have multiple things happening. And in either case, they're going to blend with local traditions because these are established societies when these other traditions come. So that's the idea of syncretism, which is another one of the big AP words. So if you know Indian Ocean, syncretism, and diasporic community, those are three things that I've talked about so far in this stream that will really help you in AP World History in a variety of ways. So a continuity even through to today. This is a picture from a year and a half ago that one of my students shared with me. So shout out Sutita, thank you. Hat tip, as they say on the internet. Celebrating the life of the Buddha in Indonesia. Now, today, Indonesia is a majority Muslim country, but there still are a lot of Buddhists, and even, it's a very big country, so even a small percentage of people is a lot of people. Hinduism would also represent continuity and change. It's continuous through this time period, but there's a change in two different ways. One is that, like I was saying, it will synchronize with Buddhism, but also it'll kind of overtake Buddhism, and then Islam will overtake it in different places in terms of like how many believers are there. One of the ways that we can see Buddhism and Hinduism functioning is local rulers taking on these religions as a way to augment their authority. And so we see this in other places around the world where rulers, like it's one of the big themes, rulers will take on and legitimate their authority using the notion of how they're supporting religious practices. And what that'll look like in Southeast Asia is often rulers in places like Java or what's today Cambodia or today Vietnam, Thailand. They have a local basis of power based on their ability to kind of tax and build infrastructure, their family connections, and then they'll augment that by claiming, in this case, claiming to be divine, or their followers claiming that they were divine after their death, and like, Shiva and Vishnu, like it's a double combination right there of powerful deities, invested in the monarch. So people they're taking those traditions and using them for their own purposes, which is part of why things get syncretized. So you'll see these things. Now, how might this look, say on an AP question? Well, you would see this image here, and maybe you don't recognize what it is, but you can tell it's supposed to be making the ruler look good. And then what you would recognize is either Shiva or Vishnu, or hopefully both, that those are Hindu deities. And so that then would be evidence of the diffusion of Hindu ideas that we would call Hindu today outside of South Asia. So that would be how you would use that. Okay. And then the last of the big world religions to come into Southeast Asia is Islam. Again, rulers would have adopted that, in this case, perhaps to augment their authority, but also as a way to cement alliances with merchants, or to cement, by this time, there's some big Islamic states, Delhi Sultanate, eventually, as we get into the 16th century, maybe sometimes we think of it as the Middle Ages, but really not too far at this period, the Ottoman Empire. And rulers there are looking to form some of those kinds of alliances. So they might have had some of those kind of motives to do that. So the Western Islands, Sumatra, Java, is where this will become prominent. On the mainland, it stays Buddhist for the most part, up until the present. Right now, Buddhist temples, Buddhist worship, Buddhist practices all over Southeast Asia. For the syncretization of this, in the resources, I have a link to a podcast I really like, from a podcast series I really like, by Ali A. Olomi, who's a professor of religion in Pennsylvania now, but he did those podcasts when he was getting his PhD in California. They're really great explanations, and he's got a real nice voice and very easy to listen to, explaining how Islam changed. You can see that in this picture. So as you look at the picture, you can kind of, that's a mosque, but it doesn't necessarily look like a mosque right away. It looks like other buildings, from that area. This mosque is in Sumatra, the big island in Southeast Asia there. All right. So the other thing besides religion that the College Board curriculum for this area really emphasizes is state forms. So you should kind of pause here. So one of the things you should take in is, how are these religious ideas? How do they come to this area? And then what influence do they have on society there? And then we'll take a look at states. So one of the things that's important early in the year to wrap your mind around is what is meant by a state. Well, a state is it's not just the idea that there's a ruler. That's not a state. A state is the means that the ruler or ruling class can use to enforce a uniform set or somewhat uniform set of laws and rules, and also that they can extract revenue and then spend that in ways that affect the population. So state really means what in English we mean when we say government, but it's a slightly broader term to kind of encompass the idea of there being a government and then the ways that that government affects things. So states form as rulers develop the ability to control these regions. So whenever you're looking at something for the students there, you're looking at something where there's a government, you're trying to figure out how does it control the territory. Well, one way it might do that is by using religion or something else as a source of legitimacy. It might also be a bureaucracy. Then state development means, when does the state get stronger? And in most of Southeast Asia in this time, the states are not very strong. Like in southern India, religious temples and communities, the evidence suggests that they're what's organizing things. Now, there's exceptions to that. But unlike, say, China, where the state is so important, the situation here is that oftentimes religious communities are the ones that are channeling and organizing those resources. But here's a couple of examples. So here, the red on this map is the Khmer Empire. So you can check out where that is. So you can see it includes parts of what's today Thailand and Vietnam and Laos. So at its height would have been controlled this large area. So this is going to be based on, again, that rice agriculture and international trade. So both things providing a surplus that's going to allow artisans and merchants, complex urban civilization to develop. At the same time, then there's going to be trade in and out of the area. So you can see how this area would be at that crossroads and also producing things for export. So irrigation and water control systems, like at Angkor Wat, the big temple complex, that's an example of the state functioning. Okay. And then using Shiva, the Hindu god, as a source of legitimacy. So the rulers, like we saw with the guy from Java, would use that as a way to impress other people that they are the legitimate ruler of this land. So in some ways, this is a land empire, but it's also connected to maritime trade routes. You can almost never take an empire and definitively call it like land-based or maritime. It's almost always both. Like, even think of the Mongols, like the world's largest land empire. They had a navy and stuff. Famously, that Mongol navy was defeated in Java, and the leader of that then became that guy, the first king of the Majapahit kingdom, or emperor of the Majapahit Empire, who was buried with that as the incarnation of both Shiva and Vishnu. So here we see with the Majapahit Empire, an empire that we could think of as primarily maritime, right? You can kind of see how it's across these different islands. And it was the first political unit that included the big population centers on Java and Sumatra, but also had at least some control over the Spice Islands to the east. And those Spice Islands to the east are where those valuable products came from. But it's not accurate just to call this a maritime empire, because without the surplus rice production in Java, which is very productive agriculture, today Java is the most populous island in the world. Without that, there wouldn't have been people to rule over things. All right, so we have a question in here from Evan, and I don't completely know the answer. So Evan wants to know, and if the Mongols also influence mainland Southeast Asia. I don't think of the Yuan dynasty as encompassing that area, though I imagine they did continue to encroach on Vietnam. So the northern Vietnam was a border area with China, of course, and so there is like this kind of hybrid, or cultures that developed there. But I don't think of the Mongols as penetrating into that area. They did attempt to take control of Java, and so that's one of the places, along with Japan and in Palestine with the Mamluks, that this area that the Mongols were stopped. So you got people, you got the Wind in Japan, you have Baburs and the Mamluks, and then you have the Majapahits there. So today in the country of Indonesia, like stopping the Mongols and this empire is part of their like usable past to create this like nationalistic identity. That I do know. So there might be more influence there than I think, or that I know of. Done. All right, thank you. One pushback would mean I'm not an expert in this area, so if people in the audience know things I don't, I would love to see that and stand corrected. Comments? All right, moving on. There's just one last section, so we go through here. And that is, I want to talk a little bit about how I see this as part of an idea of the global Middle Ages. So as the person who's made the schedule for these 5 live reviews of this time period, I've included this idea of the global Middle Ages in there, both as like a subtle way to point out that the College Board's decision to separate civilization developments in the global tapestry in Unit 1 from the idea of exchange in Unit 2 is not well thought out. And when we talk about any of these places, we have to talk about the exchange. Like, this is definitely a region where that's true, but even in a place like China, which is largely, producing so many things that it consumes itself, it's very much in contact and dialogue with other parts of the world. So I think it's important for us to do that. And it's also just important for us to know that the world is global, for a long time, in a sense, before globalization. Now, of course, it's not truly global because the hemispheres are barely connected, and only for short times. Maybe the Polynesians landed in the Americas and the Viking settlements don't last real long. But across both hemispheres, there's a lot of exchange. And like I mentioned, I'm really looking forward to Evan's screencast, looking at those connections across the Americas. So I just want to kind of highlight this idea of what I mean by a global Middle Age, or not what I mean, like what I'm learning about. So this is a scholarly term. And so for students out there, this is an area where people are using some new terminology to describe the past. Now, it's been going on for a while, about 15 years. So this slide has something from the Global Middle Ages Project, which is linked in resources there, which has things for teachers, but also students could use them if you're doing projects and you want to look at connections between 2 different areas. And I've bolded the important, or bolded what I thought of as important there, and that is that this group of scholars, and it includes historians, but also a lot of people who do literature, like people who study medieval literature from different places. And they're looking at this as networked space. So all these spaces have connections. And I hashtagged it there because one way that I've been learning more about this is following the Global Middle Ages hashtag on Twitter. Or you could also search for that term or go to the Global Middle Ages Project website. And there's conferences and there's scholars there that are involved in talking about this stuff in a variety of ways. One of the people who contributes to this occasionally, who has really taught me a lot and is very interesting follow on Twitter, is a grad student, a PhD student from Europe, studying in the Netherlands, I think, but tweeting in English at medieval Indonesia. And Siwawara Trikalpa is the name of a Javanese epic. So this is a pseudonym, but he does have he, him as its pronouns in his bio. So that's what I'll use. And his research is in languages. And so one way to think of this is that across Europe, there's, words that for places in Southeast Asia across this time period. So it's not like medieval Europeans were separated from medieval Southeast Asians. Yeah. I agree, Lucy. I've really enjoyed this. I don't know if you're a Twitter person at all, but he also has a Medium. He does some blogging there. And as he finds interesting things, he likes to point that out. The one on the left is an image probably from about the 10th century, carving in Java and showing the compound bows. And that's something where we don't really necessarily know, how those got there. So it's easy to think, well, maybe the Mongols. But it's from before there would have been Mongol contact into Southeast Asia, because the Mongols spread compound bows. Other people in Eurasia use compound bows, or of course, Javanese people could have developed them themselves. It's just curves. So we have that. And then on the right, that's Old Irish. So that's like not, in Ireland, Gaelic. It's Old Irish. And they find these words in there for Java. It's also global because, we can talk about the products moving in these large areas. So developments in the Mediterranean, like the Mamluk Empire, and I think Donald Dorto talked about the Mamluks in his stream on Dar al-Islam Monday, so you can check out that replay. They're one of the examples for the world of Islam. When they took control over the Red Sea, control both sides of it, then they're able to cut down on piracy and regulate that area and bring some stability to this region. And that led to more trade. And then crossing over the Sinai, wouldn't have been the canal yet, or the Suez Isthmus there, not necessarily where the canal is today. The people crossed over that path and then getting into Europe. So why do I say this? These developments, did they really? Evan points out that they were thinking canal a long time ago. Right, because then the Venetians would pick up the products there in the Mediterranean and then, ship them throughout Europe. The reason I kind of bring this up is when I was reading about Southeast Asia this summer, these developments far away have an impact on places in mainland and island Southeast Asia. What I mean is that commerce and demand for Indonesian spices, as one example, increases because Europe's growing because of changes in agriculture and business that you can learn about, when you study Europe in the Middle Ages. You could also check out Jillian, student, did a stream on this earlier that's available in replays. And these things are connected. So there's more commerce and economic activity in Southeast Asia because of things that are happening thousands of miles away. And this was from a tweet just today. The medieval Indonesia tweeter had just come across a record of a Bavarian wedding from 1475 where they had ordered 100 pounds of cloves, was on the thing. And this would have been this was a huge royal wedding, or maybe not quite royalty, but it was a prosperous area, nobility, high nobility, and there's a big diplomatic marriage. So a lot of people were invited to this. Would have been the whole town. And one of the points he made in that was that it's not just elites. Like, we think of spices as being a luxury good, which they were, but it's not like regular people would have never come across a clove. And cloves like only grew in one island in the eastern Indonesian archipelago until like really recently in history. So that means that those cloves traveled one way or another, probably 10,000 miles from Bavaria to the Moluccas, the islands, in, the 1400s. So that's what we mean by, that's kind of what I mean by this idea that there is a global Middle Age. So I'm going to take any more questions here, and then I'll give you these sort of last thoughts for how you might think about this region as a part of world history. So indigenous meaning local developments and traditions. So religious ideas, a lot of local spiritual traditions are going to get incorporated in with the Hindu and Buddhist and later Islamic traditions that come in. Things will get renamed. Of course, this happens all over the place. It's like where Christmas trees come from in Europe is one example. Right? You got your pagan tree and you got your Christmas holiday, Christian holiday. Like, oh, hey, Christmas trees. So you're going to see that kind of thing in a lot of places there. And so again, I only talked about two of the places, the College Board and the new unit. So depending on what, if you're a student, what your teacher chose, or if you're a teacher, which ones you choose, you did not need to cover all those examples. The College Board took a lot of criticism because the new curriculum framework can be taught in a more Eurocentric way. And so one of their responses to that was to add all these extra examples, like more than anyone would possibly teach. And it included, there's some examples in there, the things that, like I needed to look up. And so nobody's going to be teaching all of them. So like if your teacher were to talk about, the Srivijaya Empire, it's going to have a lot of similar characteristics to the Majapahit Empire. And so again, either one of those things are just examples that a student might use to illustrate their essay, or they should know enough about the basics that there's a lot of trade through this area and controlling that trade was important, that then you'd be able to figure out a stimulus-based multiple choice question without having to like have all those places memorized. The same thing, other mainland societies like the Suku Thai, the first, Thai, kind of the ancestor of the Thai nation state, or the Thai state that becomes the Thai nation state. That's going to have a fair number of things in common with the Khmer state. It's going to be more Buddhist, but, relying on local agricultural surpluses and elites to build this more powerful state that also participated in commerce. So if you kind of just keep these big ideas in mind and just know that the people in these areas took these traditions from other places and put their own spin on them and created, these world histories, beautiful, interesting, innovative cultures and, economic, political economies, politics and states. Okay. I'll take it. I'd like to thank Varun for making this sweet slide that I've copied and changed a little bit. People have any other questions or comments or, like I said, pushback? Love to see that in the question area or in the chat. Well, great. Well, thank you all for coming out tonight. I've enjoyed interacting with you in these different ways. Please hit the call to action green button there and sign up for Evan's stream, who's in the chat here. Thank you, Evan. And can learn about exchanges across the Americas in this time. So it's not trans-hemispheric, but there is exchange across the Americas that is happening during this time period too. So this is also part of a kind of global medieval, if you will. All right, with that, I think I will say good night and hopefully see you all down the road. I see some familiar names here, both from class and from the chat and other things. Thank you. I appreciate your help too. Evan helped with some of these slides and really added a lot, helped me open up my thinking. So stop sharing. Bid you all good evening from St. Paul and hope you have a wonderful night.